A very good evening. Thank you for joining us here on this Friday. You're watching India Tonight. I'm Nivedna Prabhu and joining me is my colleague Sumita Kareer. On the show tonight, first up, we put the spotlight on the historic India-UK deal which got signed yesterday in the presence of Prime Minister Modi and UK Prime Minister Starmer. Now, this is the deal that's set to reshape economic ties between the world's fifth and sixth largest economy, Sumita.
Absolutely, Nivedna. In fact, for the United Kingdom, this is the most significant trade deal that's been signed since Brexit for India. It's a gateway to enhanced market access and economic growth with 99% of Indian exports. That includes textiles, leather and jewelry gaining duty-free access to the market in the United Kingdom. So quite naturally, the question now is, when will the impending deal, the big deal with the United States be sealed? US, remember, has sealed comprehensive deals with Japan, Indonesia, Cambodia and the Philippines. So will India be next for a mini deal, or will the focus shift to the larger deal now, which is essentially the first tranche of the bilateral trade agreement? Ladies and gentlemen, we now have Dr. Mukesh Aghi of USISPF joining us to unpack this and more. Thank you very much, Mr. Aghi, for taking the time out and speaking to us here on ET Now. First things first, your thoughts on the India-UK FTA. It wraps up several rounds of talks over 3 years, which have culminated now into a deal. How significant is this moment and the deal in view of the larger geopolitical disruptions that we're seeing?
Well, I think the India-UK deal is important from a U.S. perspective because U.S. has already signed a deal with UK, but it also sends a message to the U.S. that if it's a structured deal, which is a win-win deal, India is willing to move forward and sign those deals. But more important is it's going to open up markets for both countries and drive a much stronger trade relationship, but also job opportunity and have a very positive impact on GDP also.
That's right, Mr. Aghi. In fact, Prime Minister Starmer also stated that the new global era requires us to step up and not stand aside. So what's the messaging that was directed at the United States? Would you agree that it was directed at the US? And how would the United States essentially be looking at what transpired yesterday when both sides agreed on a mutually beneficial deals, and of course tariffs were downed, tariffs were cut from both the sides, and it was not a unilateral deal?
Well, you have to understand at the moment the international order has changed. When I say change, is the whole muscular diplomacy seems to be the way to move forward. And US is busy announcing its deals. It announced trade deal with Japan, Indonesia, Philippines, and other countries. And it's in the process of closing a deal with EU. And US negotiators are going next week to Europe to have some common understanding with Chinese also. So it's important to understand from Washington, D.C. perspective, the US is signing all these deals and India seems to be getting isolated from that perspective. The challenge we have is that U.S. is demanding a structure of the deal which seems to be one-sided. At the same time, there's certain red lines which India does not want to cross, especially in the agriculture and dairy products. But you have to understand that you can always look at and find a solution in a very difficult environment because the trade between the two countries, India and the United States, is at around $200 billion. When Prime Minister came in February and he met with President Trump, and both agreed to take this trade to $500 billion by 2030. I think if we are trying to capture headline news, which is critical for Trump, then we should talk about a trade deal which is going to drive $1 trillion partnership between the two countries. When you look at announcement from Japan, the big announcement they're going to put in $550 billion investment into the US. The Indonesian deal, it was the same thing. So I think we need to think about out of the box and say, what's the big announcement? And the big announcement would be a trade deal between India and the United States will drive $1 trillion business opportunity between the two countries.
Well, Mr. Aghi, we'll have to wait and see whether that happens or not. But as of now, both the leaders have decided to take trade to $500 billion by the end of this decade. But let me go back to the point that you made about isolation that India could face, given the fact that US has signed all of these deals and, of course, is on its way to sign a deal with the European Union as well. But this isolation and the challenge that you say that India could face, how can that threat or that challenge be mitigated so India gets the best deal?
Well, you have to understand when I talk about isolation, it's not just about trade deal between US and India. The percentage of traffic will send a message to corporate America, which is looking at de-risking supply chain from China. If they move their manufacturing to India, what is the tariff they have to pay to bring those goods into the US itself? So lower the tariff between the two countries, the more US companies will set up manufacturing in India. We saw the classic example of Apple. President Trump said Apple should not do manufacturing in India, but move it to the US. But Apple decided that for its shareholders' benefit and consumer benefit, it makes sense to have manufacturing in India itself. So the other companies are looking from that perspective. Now, the question is, how do you get around the current standstill between the two countries on trade? I think we have to look into details to understand as to what is the president's expectations. Obviously, he'll want a one-sided deal, which is not possible politically and economically from an India perspective. But it's always you can find a solution to a complex problem. So it is important that the negotiator keep on talking. As I understand, U.S. negotiator are coming to Delhi to take this forward, and hopefully we can find a solution and move forward.
Absolutely, Mr. Aghi. That's essentially what we are also hearing, that a team from the United States will be traveling to India in the second half of August to negotiate the first tranche of the bilateral trade deal. So does this perhaps mean that the mini deal has been put on a back burner?
No, I don't think so. I think there'll be two tranches to the deal. One is the current deal, they're coming to close that out. The second tranche will get a little more complicated because it deals with non-tariff barriers, and there are certain limitations India has in that arena. So the focus is on tranche one. Let's close it down. What percentage of tariff are going to be put in, and what are the other implications? So I think the objective is to give enough data and meat to the president so he can announce the deal in an immediate future.
All right. So tranche one is essentially what you're suggesting could be the big focus. But Dr. Aghi, what's the range that you're anticipating if a deal doesn't come through by August 1 for India?
Well, at the moment, we do have the standard 10% tariff, and the earlier announcement was 26%. There's a possibility that U.S. may say, listen, we're going to put in 26% tariff starting August 1 until the deal is done. There are secondary tariffs such as steel and aluminum, which stands at much higher percentage. So you can see there are certain looming threats on tariffs which could drive the deal. But, you know, the fundamental issue and my recommendation to the Trump administration is please don't negotiate with certain threats, because countries don't react positively to that in threats itself. So I think my gut feeling is that you will see that 26% postponed with a time limit so India can close the deal with the United States.
Right. Dr. Aghi, let me talk about the deal and, of course, the challenges that are emerging, or rather have emerged, that pertain to agri, dairy and GM crops that's been holding up the finalization of the deal. And, of course, the fact that it is likely, or the Donald Trump administration wants it to be a one-sided deal. But what else is President Trump looking at securing from India?
Well, obviously, there's a lot of pressure from the farm lobby in the U.S., from the U.S. grain lobby to open up the ag market, because that's where the vote base for Trump also. It is important to understand that these are red lines which India cannot cross, because when you have 60% of your workforce working on farm, living a very subsistence earning, it is hard to open that. But I think you can dissect that. For example, open up soya. India does not produce soya. India does not consume much of soya. So that could be a possibility. Open up lentils, where basically what we have is India is the world's largest consumer of lentils. And at the moment, our imports are largely from Canada. Look at possibility of moving those to United States itself. So I think you can basically slice and dice and look at the possibilities to move things forward.
Right. One final question, Dr. Aghi, before we let you go, and this is essentially on, the fact that does India really have an opportunity to drive tariff rates to lower levels than what's already been signed with other Southeast Asian countries? Could we have that as an advantage over countries in our neighborhood?
No, absolutely. I think it is important that you open up the market, let the domestic market step up, innovate more, compete. And history shows that once those challenges come in, Indian companies step up and they become world class. So we should not be focused on protecting those industries. So India can lower more tariffs, especially with the U.S. I think U.S. is asking zero tariffs into India. Is that possible in some sector? Yes. Some sectors you may want to gradually open it up. So it all depends when you look at from item by item what's possible and what's not possible.
Right, Dr. Aghi. In fact, zero tariff lines is something that we have seen as a feature in that UK-India bilateral trade agreement. We'll have to see whether that also becomes a feature in the US-India trade deal, whether there's going to be a mini deal, or will we focus our attention and our energies on negotiating the first tranche of the bilateral trade agreement, given that fall is not very far. On that note, thank you very much once again for taking the time out and speaking to us here on ET Now.